Many of you know Thomas Berry passed away at 94 after the most remarkable life, of which I'll just give you a very brief outline and then talk a little bit about his affinity with Confucianism and the Chinese traditions. Thomas is a person who comes out of the South and throughout his life had all the characteristics of the American South, namely a gentleman, a warm and loving human being. But he found his way into the studies of the various world religions. And probably there's almost no one that we have met in our career over 40 years who has studied as much and intensely as Thomas Berry did. He began with a dissertation in the Western history, culture, religions. And his PhD was on Vico, Giambattista Vico, one of the great philosophers of Western history. And through those studies, he was able to understand how you periodize the great sweeps of history, which is something that John will pick up later. So one of his great contributions is the reading of history, both human history and Earth history, and universe history. But I want to ground this discussion today by the fact that he was a historian of religions. He was a historian of culture, of the West, and of Asia, and of indigenous traditions. So his journey in the intense study of European history, Western history, culminating in this philosophy of history of Vico, was then paralleled by his journey in 1948 to China, where he began his studies of the Asian traditions. And in fact, he did, which many people don't realize, 2 books on Asian religions, one on Buddhism and one on religions of India, both of which are still being published by Columbia University Press. But his journey to China was absolutely central for his life. And if you can imagine in '48 what China was like, the Japanese and the Maoists were contesting territory. It was a hugely, a period of great upheaval. And he met on the ship from San Francisco, William Theodore de Berry, Ted de Berry, who is one of the great Asian scholars in the world, actually. And they became lifelong friends, a friendship over 60 years. And we dedicated one of these last books, The Sacred Universe, to that friendship with Ted and Fanny de Berry, because Fanny also brought in the Teilhardian perspective, and we all worked together on the American Teilhard Association in Riverdale, New York. But before I get ahead of myself, the 2 of them, Ted de Berry and Thomas Berry, were amazing scholars of the religions of China and India and so on. And they had to leave, obviously, in '49, Mao took over, and so they had to come back to the States, but they landed in New York, and Ted was at Columbia already. And he founded this extraordinary program in Asian religions, Asian culture, Asian history, and did translations which were not available. That what we have gotten now in translations over the last 50 years of these traditions, especially from East Asia, from China, Japan, and Korea, is extraordinary, and in large measure due to de Berry and his friendship with Thomas Berry. They founded the Asian Thought and Religion Seminar there as well. And then Thomas set up at Fordham University a History of Religions program, the only graduate program of its kind in the country, and still, I think, unique in its measure and its breadth and its depth. But he also was able to set up a Riverdale Center of Religious Research on the Hudson, overlooking these palisades that are millions and millions of years old. And you had this beautiful sense of the river, the palisades, this great red oak right outside of the Riverdale Center that was 400-year-old red oak that he dedicated the Dream of the Earth to, actually. But at that Riverdale Center, he continued his studies of the various world religions, and every room was filled with books, many in the original language. He studied Chinese, he studied Sanskrit, he certainly knew the Latin and so on of the Church Fathers, and so he had these amazing book collections from all of the world's religions, and he moved on into other areas of, as I said, indigenous traditions, and then into what most people know him for is he brought Teilhard de Chardin's extraordinary perspective of the emerging, unfolding universe, earth, human story into a sense that this is our story. This is how we fit in to the billion-year-old evolutionary narrative. And that was an contribution that I think is almost unmeasurable. We are only beginning to understand what that means fully as we take in the power and the energy of this huge journey of the universe, literally. And we're going to be showing right next door in 213 this film in the next session, Journey of the Universe, which we've been working on for 5 years with Brian Swim, the cosmologist, and so on. But this comes out of Teilhard de Chardin, Thomas Berry, Brian Swim, and then the work of many of the people here and on this panel to give us the large-scale orientation to our moment that is critical in terms of the environmental crisis that Thomas saw many, many years ago, and his sense of urgency, prophetic sensibility about where we are as humans and the need for new human-earth relations. What he would say over and over again is the religions have ethics for suicide, for homicide, but not for biocide or geocide or ecocide. It's on that level of intensity and urgency that we have to rethink human-earth relations. We have to reimagine, decenter our role and recenter our role in universe history, in Earth's evolution. And that's what Thomas was really bringing forward. These last 2 books of essays, which maybe we can pass around for you, just came out in September, and it represents what we're going to touch on here, his contributions in terms of world religions, which, as I say, very few people were aware of. One of the books is called The Christian Future and the Fate of Earth, where he's challenging Christianity to this large perspective in response to the environmental crisis. And the other is called The Sacred Universe. Columbia Press has published that one. And that is his series of essays on world religions. The Christianity one comes in a series called Ecology and Justice, out of Mary and Orvis books, which is trying to put together this sense that many of the religions have had about justice for the human, but is trying to enlarge that sense and put it into the context of cosmology, ecology, and the human. So we've got universe, earth, human evolution, and this new understanding of ecology and justice coming together for a sustaining future. He said, what is this sustainable development? We have to have the flourishing of life. If we have to talk about a love relationship with John, my husband, this isn't just sustainable, this is flourishing, this is life, this is growing. And I am so fortunate to have this partner in this work for all these years. Thomas Berry married us, and we want it to be flourishing, not just sustainable. So let me just conclude by giving you a little glimpse into his understanding of one of the traditions that we don't fully appreciate or understand, and that is Confucianism. Because Confucianism has probably influenced more people on the planet than almost any other religion. When you consider the numbers of people in East Asia, in China, over its history, and it's influenced people in Korea, in Japan, in Hong Kong, in Singapore, in Vietnam, unknown to most of us here, but it has an immense history, a complex evolution and development. But I want to bring in, why was it that Thomas was so deeply inspired by Confucianism, as well as indigenous traditions, which is John's special area. But Confucianism really gave him a glimpse, I think, of what he would call an ecozoic society, this new possibility of harmony with the main trinity in Confucianism is heaven, earth, and human, that I've been drawing on already in this discussion. But the idea is that the human is this co-creator with the fecundity of the universe, with all of the elements and forces of the universe, so that the spiritual path for Confucianism is, how do we harmonize with the changes of nature? Those of you who understand the Book of Changes, the I Ching, this is at the pulse of Chinese thought, both Confucian and Taoist. But it's saying, in contrast to Buddhism, which has appropriately and beautifully a sense of withdrawing from change for a deep inner sensibility, interiority, integrity. But the Confucians had this powerful sense of the pulsation, vibrancy, aliveness of the natural world. And so the seasons, the cycle of the day, all of this is something that one was to harmonize with, to put oneself in relationship to. You can see how powerful this is for a new understanding of ecology and spirituality and ethics.